Hey everybody, Chris McCabe of e-commerce. Chris here, coming back at you with another quick video about some trends I'm seeing, some alarming things. This is for any brand owner, Amazon business owner who could potentially be reviewed by Amazon or flagged and asked to produce compliance documents. It could be a supplements brand, could be electronics that you sell, could be children's toys. We're seeing a lot of different people this summer asked for compliance documentation. What I want to talk to you about today is making sure that you don't fabricate or edit or Photoshop any of these documents, whether it's out of panic or ignorance or bad advice you get from a so-called expert. We're hearing from a lot of people who are caught. Amazon's clearly doing a better job at either asking for these documents, requesting the right kinds of documents. For some reason, a lot of brand owners don't have them handy or don't have the right ones. In some cases, they just go ask their manufacturer for certain documents, or maybe they're working with a third-party service. But either way, the outcome is that faked or fabricated documents are being sent into Amazon and getting the seller flagged for review for an account suspension, or sometimes just outright suspended. So I don't need to tell you how damaging a suspension can be, but I do need to tell you that it can be very difficult to come back, if not impossible, to come back from a suspension for code of conduct or compliance violations, these kinds of behavioral, not performance-based, not your products attracted a few defective item or inauthentic item complaints. That's totally different stuff. This is something where you can't sit down and write a plan of action like you might have in the old days. And I mention this because I've seen a lot of POAs, plans of action, that sellers have shown us that failed miserably. They either wrote them themselves thinking that that was their way out. They realized they had fabricated or edited compliance documentation and they had been caught, and they thought, well, first thing I have to do is admit guilt, profess my wrongdoing, apologize, take responsibility, get my account back because I'm going to write a good, solid plan of action. And perhaps they even plan to run it by a so-called expert before submitting it. That's not how these work anymore. That's misinfo that I've seen on LinkedIn, on Facebook groups. Sometimes bad info is being passed around and shared among groups of sellers on WhatsApp who aren't really vetting information for true accuracy or expertise. When it's your entire business, your entire account at stake, I'm not sure why you wouldn't take 5, 10, 15 minutes to devote yourself to some research or some scrutiny of the information you're seeing online or in a YouTube video or wherever you come by it. I've had a few sellers give me some weak excuses. Well, I trust so-and-so and they're the ones who told me. They've told me things in the past that I trusted. Well, that might not even be a compliance expert, right? That might not even be a person who understands this source material. So they had no business saying it and you had no business trusting it. I don't want this series I'm doing around compliance and around trend identification to be overly alarmist or to be accusatory beyond what I'm saying in terms of warning people away from these behaviors, but this could be the end of your business. There's no two ways about it. I'll explain why. Amazon says no POA, no plan of action for this. You either prove that you never did this, you prove that Amazon made a mistake and that this didn't happen. You back it up with proof in your written appeal, proof in your dispute, documented proof, whatever the case might be, not a plan of action. As soon as you admit that you failed this in whichever way, shape, or form, most of the time, Amazon's just going to shut the door. So number one, if you're talking to service providers or again, so-called experts who are telling you, oh, this is something that we've done before, we'll get you a POA, have a nice day, just pay us such and such amount of money. They either don't know what they're telling you is wrong and that they're charging you for nothing, or they know it already and they're doing it in a deceptive fashion. So first step is decide if you can even dispute this, if you even have any evidence that this didn't happen. Obviously, prevention is the best approach. Make sure you never work with anyone, whether it's an employee or not, who even considers editing or fabricating documentation. That's the best way to avoid this. The second way that we've seen people approach is potentially blaming their manufacturer or their compliance agency or whoever made these changes. Some people are blaming their own employees and producing termination letters showing that they didn't know their employee was doing this and they've terminated them. They have the letter on company stationery or letterhead, and they prove the employee's been terminated. That's not a golden ticket to getting this resolved. And of course, you're still playing with fire if you think you're going to get this resolved if you're caught by just terminating people or telling Amazon that you've terminated whichever service you're working with. The bottom line is, don't blindly submit documentation just because you think or assume it's legitimate. Make sure you go through it with a fine-tooth comb. Make sure you know what you're looking at with compliance documentation. Make sure you're talking to a manufacturer who is not going to fake documents on your behalf, because that manufacturer might not care if you fire them. They might not care if you replace them. They might actually think you're replaceable. And so they might be willing to do something like this. And especially if they're overseas, they might not know or care or appreciate what U.S. law is. So it's up to you to care or appreciate what U.S. law is and what consumer protection means in the United States, if we're talking about an Amazon.com account, especially, but even just generally, if you're a USA-based business, because the buck stops with you, and it's up to you to know whether or not you're submitting faked, doctored, manipulated, fabricated documentation. And by the way, just in closing here, since this topic's fairly straightforward, I don't need to go too into the weeds. I'd like to conclude with this. You're not just breaking Amazon's policies when you fake or edit or fabricate documentation. You're actually breaking the law. This is fraud. You can't fake safety compliance documentation. And again, what are the categories that Amazon is doing this for? Electronics? Well, that makes sense, right? You probably don't want sparks flying every time somebody plugs in a device into their wall outlet. So there's a safety hazard there. There's a fire hazard there. Consumables like supplements. Well, certainly people, not just in the United States, but in all countries, don't want to consume things that might not be safety tested, that might be harmful to them or to anyone they care about, that might make them sick or that might send them to the hospital. That makes sense. You don't need to be a business owner to appreciate that. And finally, the other category we've seen is children's toys. Any safety issue around toys, you shouldn't be flaunting that, not taking it seriously, trying to slide something by Amazon, trying to get away with something. Because ultimately, what does that mean to Amazon? It means they cannot trust you with true information, accurate information. It also means you pose a threat to their buyers. And it might not just be a threat that they lose their money. It might be a threat to their safety or to their well-being. So of course, Amazon takes that seriously. And as one final point, is Amazon consistent in enforcement? Are they always flagging the right sellers and leaving other sellers alone who shouldn't be flagged? Of course not. We've seen how their tools work. There are lots of mistakes. There are lots of band-aids and patches put on gaping holes, right? There are lots of breakdowns, inconsistencies, wrong flags. That's just part of being a seller on Amazon. We all know that. And we know that that's going to stay true for probably a long time to come, especially as they do some trial and error around AI and other forms of automation. We also know that manual investigations, especially by some of my former teams, performance teams, policy enforcement teams, we know that they make a lot of mistakes. We know that their communication is not the best. A lot of it's cookie cutter, general, opaque, not informative, right? So you can't base your appeal decision just on some generic template that they've sent you. But it doesn't mean that you don't have to appeal with quality content, accurate info, detailed information. If any of this is unclear, and if my warning that you need to stay out of this enforcement net, if any of this is unclear to you in any way, shape, or form, definitely feel free to reach out to us or to me personally at e-commerce Chris, because this is a topic that we care about a lot. Also, consumer protection agencies in the United States care quite a bit about this. The FTC and the US government in general care a lot about this. State and federal agencies both. So not something to scoff at, not something to roll the dice with and hope Amazon doesn't catch you. Some people have probably evaded this in the past and think they can get away with it if Amazon ever asks them for legit documentation around compliance in the future. I'm here to tell you that's not how this works. Amazon does up their game from time to time. And at least right now, they seem to be getting on the ball with it. Any questions on this? Let us know. And again, I'm Chris of e-commerce Chris. Thanks for listening.